Hi, I'm Justin Shone and I'm here at the Kwampter Shell Mound with Professor Geoff Bailey. Geoff, can you tell us a little bit about the history of research here?
Today is 40 years almost to the day since I first came here as a research student from Cambridge University to do some field work for my PhD, and I wasn't the first person to come here. My supervisor at that time at Sydney University was Richard Wright, who'd been up here 10 years previously in 1963 to come and look at these shell mounds because he'd been asked by the Australian Institute of Aboriginal Studies to check out whether they were Aboriginal sites or natural features. And this had become a very critical issue because the mining company, as Comalco as it then was, had just begun mining operations, and obviously that could have proved quite destructive for sites if they were Aboriginal heritage features. Now, Richard did a little bit of work here, and he did some excavation at this site. And the reason why he came here to a site which in those days was known as the Oil Rig Mound, because there was a very early commercial exploration here. The reason why he came here was because firstly it was accessible by road and fairly close to the settlement, and secondly because for whatever reason somebody at a very early stage in the exploration of this area had put a cut through the mound, a deep trench. Must have been a bulldozer that had pushed a hole through the mound. Probably somebody came along and thought, what's in the middle of this mound, let's dig a hole. Well, as a good archaeologist, it's always good practice, if you can, to work from an existing section. And if somebody has put a section through for whatever motives, then that's a huge advantage, because you can see what you're excavating, you can see the depth of deposit, you can take samples out without having to do a lot of excavation and without digging holes into the ground, digging blind. And we all, if we can, like to work from existing sections through the deposit. So those were the obvious attractions. It's also quite a big mound. It's not the biggest in this region, as I discovered, but it's one of the bigger sites, and these are phenomenal sites in a way. People say, why are these mounds formed in this shape and with this volume of material? There's a sort of challenge there. How could that have been created by day-to-day activities of Aboriginal communities moving around in this landscape? These big shell mounds, as you can see looking around, they're quite loosely piled with shells. So this is an archaeologist's nightmare when it comes to excavation. You put a small hole down and the section walls will very quickly collapse on you. So that's a big challenge, a big problem technically for archaeological excavation, and I think it's been a deterrent, one deterrent, to people doing much excavation into these mounds. And the holes that have been put into these sites often tend to be put into the low mounds, the small mounds, or the low parts of the big mounds, because they're easier to put a hole into. But then of course you miss the longer term history of these big mounds. So the opportunity of this site was that it gave a chance to see a full stratigraphic section from top to bottom of quite a big site. Richard Wright was the first person to look at this site in 1963. I came back in 1972 and did a more extensive sampling of the site, and I cleaned up the section here behind us where the original bulldozer cut had gone through the mound, and I excavated about 3 cubic meters of deposit in a column. That sounds like not very much, because the total volume of this site is something like 2,500 cubic meters, so it's a rather small sample. There are two principles that inform a lot of archaeological work. One is to build on your predecessor's work, which often means going back to the same site and doing more excavation. The other is to avoid destruction. all excavation is destruction, the famous axiom. So you try and minimize your destructive impact on a site. And that's another reason for going back to look at a site where somebody has already opened a hole and created a section.